So, the parable Jesus told was about a fig tree. Many people have not seen fig trees growing. They grow in subtropical parts of the world generally. They grow very well around the Mediterranean Sea. And that's why in Palestine, Jesus had no difficulty speaking to the people about what they knew. And they knew very well. Well, here's a fig, or several figs, growing on a tree with quite big leaves. Useful, as you know, for Adam and Eve, who were able to take fig leaves and sew them together and cover up when they realized they were naked. Though, of course, with the shape of the fig leaves, they had to be careful how they sewed them. Figs, they're not that big, of course. They're about this size, right? And they grow, as other fruits grow, on a tree that can, if it is well cared for, flourish in the climate of Palestine, southern Europe, and be a very important part of the diet for the local people. You know, on one occasion though, Jesus looked at a fig tree, didn't have any fruit as far as he could see, and cursed it. And the disciples, next day when they saw the tree had actually wilted and died, were shocked and surprised that Jesus should be responsible for something like that. And perhaps they were listening very clearly when he told this parable that we've heard. And perhaps they were thinking to themselves, that doesn't match with what he said. They were shocked. Or perhaps it did match, only too well. And they were frightened. Jesus had a way with telling stories, much better than me, and he could get through to people talking about what they already knew. I think with this parable, even before he was halfway through, he had the people in the story. They were there with him. And they were giving the answers that Jesus gave the gardener at the end. Perhaps with a feeling, no, Jesus, no, it can't be, not that way. As they heard Jesus say about the master, the owner of the vineyard, who had planted, or who had the gardener plant a tree, a fig tree, 3 years earlier. And a master who was pretty sure about the bottom line, whether this tree or that vine was making a profit. That's what he was interested in, and how quickly it would grow. Would it be providing him fruit right from the start? If it wasn't, cut it down. Jesus talked about this man, concerned about his profits, concerned about having fruit to sell, and not wasting an inch of his garden, of his vineyard. Jesus talked about this man who would come back regularly, and he told the gardener about it. He said, I've looked at this tree ever since it's been planted, no figs. And the people would have been saying, well, of course there'll be no figs yet. You have to wait. A fruit tree needs time to grow and to get strong before it can produce fruit. Actually, a fig tree can produce fruit quite quickly. But it's really only after 3 years that the real abundance of fruit can come. And after 3 years, it can be masses. First year, the second year, a little bit. And that's a surprise. Especially for someone who comes from a country where the biggest fruit producer is the apple tree. In England, everyone knows that it takes a good 3 years before a seedling, tiny apple tree can grow big enough and strong enough to produce even 1 or 2 apples. And even then, after 3 or 4 years, if it does produce a couple of apples, if you want the tree to grow stronger, you cut them off before they sap the strength from the tree. Not worried that you might be missing the first fruit, but wanting the tree to grow. And the people were saying that Jesus, you got it wrong. After 3 years is not long enough. And they were there. Tell the gardener to speak to the owner. Of course, Jesus comes to that. He speaks the words of a good gardener who knows his trees, who knows all the crops, all the plants that are in the garden, much better than the owner. And the gardener says, no, not yet. Give it a chance, give it a chance, give me a chance with it. 1 more year, you'll see. And I shall put manure around it, I will tend it carefully. But the gardener probably promises the owner of the vineyard more than would be expected for this young fig tree. It probably doesn't need quite so much care and attention. It will grow. But he promises. Give it a bit longer. And it will bear fruit. You'll see. But if it doesn't, you can cut it down then. But he's an experienced gardener. He knows. Next year, it's the season for figs. The owner will come back and be delighted in the abundance of the crop that he will see. People were with Jesus all through, right? Listening to this story, they know what it's about. They know their fruit trees too. It's a rural community. Everybody knows everything about all the crops that grow around them. They've been among them since childhood. Very different from today, where so many people live in towns and cities. And so many have never seen the beauty of nature, have never actually seen that their food does not grow in Costco, or in Carrefour, or in the local 7-Eleven. It doesn't start its life there. It starts among the beautiful things that God has created in the country, the fields, the forest, and the orchards. People also who have been with Jesus, wrapped up in this short story. Of course, it's a short story. They don't have to pay. They don't need a great long attention span. They could well come from the video age. This story is for them too. They're with Jesus, and they know what he's talking about. They too have been impatient. They too have seen people whose lives should be cut short by God because of the bad things that they've done, the evil that they've been involved in. Jesus wraps them around with this story and says, but be patient. This is not God's way. Think again about that person that you would judge. Think again about your response to disaster. what caused this disaster? Why did God bring this upon those people? Why did it happen to them? Just as today, people ask that question, you should not expect a simplistic answer. A tower had fallen down. People had been killed. Were those people worse sinners than all the others around who witnessed its aftermath? It had been a great event, talked about right through the country. Everybody had heard about it. And they all got their opinions. Oh yes, those people living there, they're bad people. It's not surprising. Yes, we all understand. That's why God allowed it to happen. Wait. Does God allow these things to happen? And should you be so quick to judge? Well, whether we should be so quick or not, we often are. I'm grateful to one of my colleagues, a minister in England, who told me on Facebook yesterday about this report, which I then downloaded and printed. A report about lies. Just what you expect from the church, right? Well, actually it does come from the church. And it's headed, "The Lies We Tell Ourselves." And it's a report which has been put together by the Baptist Union of Great Britain, the Methodist Church, the Church of Scotland, and the church of which I was a minister, the United Reformed Church. That's the church whose predecessors sent missionaries to this part of Taiwan to found the Presbyterian Church here. These churches represent their congregations about 1 million people in Britain. And they're talking about lies, or at least the committee that was set up to discuss the state of the nation and to continue discussing it and continue to produce reports such as this. The committee came up with this. The lies we tell ourselves. Why do we tell ourselves lies? Because it makes us comfortable. The subtitle is Ending Comfortable Myths About Poverty. You may not think that that's a problem for a rich country like Britain. In a country of 60 or so million people, the report makes clear 13 million live in poverty. That should be a shock to the world. That should be a shock to Christians in Britain, most of whom live in comfortable middle-class society. 13 million people in a rich country. It matches almost point for point the percentage of poor in the United States of America too. Though perhaps, in fact, it's a slightly greater percentage in Britain. How could this be, and how can it have escaped our notice, people are saying. Well, they should be. And perhaps they will be today as ministers and preachers get hold of this document and start to work through the facts that are presented. You see, one thing is we are too quick to judge. And the one reason why people brush aside talk of poverty and a true understanding of the extent of poverty in a rich nation is that they can do it by saying, well, it's really their fault. People are poor because they want to be. Do they? My own Member of Parliament, to whom I write quite regularly about my concerns about Britain and about Britain's relationships with the world, including Taiwan. My own Member of Parliament, who is a government minister, said the year before last on TV, and I discovered it here because his name's in the report, said there is a culture of poverty, a culture of people who actually don't want to rise up above their poverty. There are many families in Britain who have had nobody working for 4 generations. There's a culture of poverty. They bring it upon themselves. 4 generations. Their fathers didn't work, their grandfathers didn't work. And people believe it, and it's stated here. You can even see such a quote in church websites and church newsletters, because everybody believes it. Except that minister's own government department, which says that fewer than 2% of the population could be said even to have 2 generations unemployed. And as for families that have been unemployed for 3 generations, they are so few we can't find them to do any research. But on TV, on a key news program, which everyone wants to watch if they want to be right up to date with the news, this man said, following Tony Blair's example, who said 3 generations when he was Prime Minister, said there are 4-generation families who've been out of work. They've not tried! And we want to get them back into work, or into work for the first time for 5 generations. And it's not true. But by saying this, the whole country is listening. Even people in churches believe it's true. And even the government department has no statistics whatsoever to prove it. And even those who are unemployed and in the 2nd generation of unemployment are mostly people, one of whose parents is disabled, and whose other parent has to spend their time, full time, caring for their partner. And the son, who might be expected to work, has just turned 16 and has not yet found a job. In most cases, those families with 2 generations unemployed are counted in the statistics because for 1 generation, just now, they need to look after each other full time. The next generation has not yet had time to find a job. A 16-year-old who hasn't found a place in college is unemployed and counted. But as for 3 generations, the department responsible for the statistics doesn't have any statistics. Yet a government minister can spread this lie about people wanting to be in poverty. Churches believe it. Christians believe it. And that means, so we don't have to do anything about it. It's their fault. Another one is the idea that those who live in poverty, well, they shouldn't have too much. They are scroungers. They're just trying to get something for nothing. Britain has a good policy of looking after people who don't have work, making sure that children do not suffer too much. How is that? They are scroungers. They're engaged in benefit fraud, claiming unemployment benefits when they're not entitled to them. Government statistics, as the churches point out, show that about 0.2% of the money that goes out for such people for benefits, 0.2% is fraudulently received. In other words, people have lied and got that money. 0.2%. And in the next line they say, wouldn't the taxman be pleased if there was such a low rate of fraud among the people paying taxes in Britain? And if the bankers didn't claim such huge rewards for their failures? The amount of fraud that goes on among the rich people is immense. The poor, actually, to claim benefits fraudulently is extremely difficult because there are so many forms to fill in. There are interviews to go through. And if you can get through those interviews, you're mighty clever. You'll be a professor, probably. And so these lies are told about poor people. Poor people are battered with these every day by the rest of the population. Telling comfortable myths through the lies that even government ministers have shared. The population lives in ignorance. And a population that 60 years ago, when I was born, 60 years ago was recovering from the Second World War and building a nation with the best health service in the world, which is now being sold to private companies. with the best education system, at least that was the aim, free for all children, so that Britain could become a great nation. Now, that may seem to be irrelevant to everyone else here who doesn't come from Britain. But it gives us an idea, doesn't it, about how we all try to avoid issues, and often very successfully. I wonder how much of this kind of thinking goes on in Taiwan or in the countries from which you come. Possibly there's not quite the same opportunity in many countries because there are not the same huge disparities between rich and poor. But those who are super rich somehow have to justify their position. Somehow they have to claim that I'm worth it and he's not. I am the ideal human being, and those people are not. And actually, among the poor in Britain, the majority of the poor do not stay out of work for very long. They get work that lasts as long as the employer wants them, for maybe 6 months during peak times of production or whatever. Most people are not long-term unemployed. But those who are in jobs for a short time probably never earn what the government has set as a minimum wage. And when they're out of work, they receive benefits which, for most people, are around half of what they would get in employment on what is considered the minimum wage necessary for a family to live on. So most of the poor actually try to work. And when they work, they'll work very hard for not very much. Exploited by those who are earning sums that the poor don't even try to dream about. Unless occasionally they're buying a ticket for the national lottery in hopes of millions of pounds, which are very unlikely, of course. So the churches in Britain have produced this report about the myths about poverty. It's worth reading, I think, even for people outside Britain, to get us thinking about what we do ourselves and why we are perhaps not challenged as much as we should be by a world that we've heard is in great need, but we're not sure it's very near us. Not sure it's in our neighbourhood or our community, or whether it's really anything of our responsibility. Of course, the challenge is for all of us. There was one occasion, I remember well, when there was a drought in England. And the drought was a very, very hot summer. It was a lovely summer if you had nothing else to do but enjoy the sun and going out. But this was made so much of on the news. Everyone around the world heard that there was a drought in England. And in some churches in South India, they started making collections to help the poor of England, because they knew what a drought really meant. They felt their responsibility in their churches for their sisters and brothers in England who had such problems. Of course, that was far from the truth. Today, people around the world might be caused to think a little bit more carefully about those in poverty, not just in their own neighbourhoods, not just in countries which are almost traditionally poor, but about poverty that affects everyone, and about the judgments that we make. The judgments that we make about others in their particular situations. I did speak to one Englishman about this, chance, after I saw it, who said, of course, poverty in Britain, it's nothing like poverty in other parts of the world. People have TVs to watch. They've got lots of benefits. Okay, you get below the benefit level, but that's only half what you need to live on. Actually, when you're in poverty, wherever you are, what it means is you don't have a choice. You are dependent on other people to see you through whatever troubles you might get into, because you can't do it for yourself. Totally dependent, unable to make the interesting kind of choices that we can all make and have made, and our presence here shows it. That lack of choice can be just as serious in a rich country as in a poor country. Perhaps even more serious, because you're not expected by the vast majority of people to get to that level. When Jesus spoke about the fig tree, I think he was talking about this kind of judgment that we do make, and the lies with which we deceive ourselves so that we might be comfortable. And he talks about the tower that fell, Siloam. They brought it on themselves. Poverty in Britain, in Taiwan, in America, in Indonesia, they bring it on themselves, it's their fault. And we are comfortable. Because if it's their fault, it's their responsibility, and we don't have to do anything about it. Jesus said, we're all responsible. That fig tree, cut it down. It's no good. We've offered it life, we've given it 3 years of life. It doesn't deserve to live any longer. I think people were clear. Jesus was talking about a fig tree. He was talking about their judgments on other people. Just an image, but it was a very clear one. Picture, they didn't need to look at a picture like that. They knew it. They had it in their heads even before he finished the story. They were challenged. Challenged, not perhaps immediately to go out and act and help someone, unless they knew that someone. Probably felt many of them knew that there was someone in their neighbourhood. Yes, I've misjudged them. But the challenge, first of all, is to ourselves about how we think. How we see what's going on. How we interpret what we hear. The challenge is to think again. The challenge is the same challenge that someone gets when they're doing a PhD. Doing an experiment, is this really the result? Or has something affected it in another way? Am I really seeing around me in the world what people say I should be seeing? Or with the help of Jesus, should I be focusing a bit more clearly? With the help, perhaps, of the people of Jesus, such as those who wrote this report. That's how people in Britain, in British churches, should be looking with a new sight, new insight. But it's a challenge for all of us. How do we judge what's happening? And how does it make us respond? Jesus was clear enough in the way that he told the story. Clear enough in the very deep demands that he made on his disciples. He always said, I'm here. I'm here to share your burdens. And you will be tested. But as Paul discovered, only within your limits. Not beyond those limits. God is good to you. So that you may continue to do God's will. To him be the glory. In Jesus' name. Amen.